Two of the lights in the piano room corridor were broken, and no one had reported it for repair. Those two patches of darkness hung overhead like blinded eyes, swallowing the light and spitting out a hazy gray. The plaster had peeled away in a few corners, exposing the drab concrete, with the edges curling up like old wounds. Clutching her laptop, Sarah turned into the room at the very end. As she pushed the door open, the hinge let out a sharp screech, like fingernails scraping across a blackboard. She frowned, squeezed inside sideways, and closed the door behind her. This piano room was at the end of the corridor. The air conditioning worked only intermittently. In summer it was as stifling as a steamer, and in winter as cold as an ice cellar, so no one ever fought for it. But Sarah liked it. She liked this feeling of being forgotten. No disturbances, no one staring, so she could quietly write her own things. The computer booted up, the screen's cold light falling on her face, making those calm eyes look even more profound. She plugged in her headphones and clicked on the project file labeled V7_ under revision. The melody flowed from the headphones. The piano began first in the lower register, like someone muttering to themselves in a room late at night. The sound was very soft, so soft it seemed afraid of waking someone, yet unable to resist saying something. Then the strings wove their way in, not a grand sweeping wash but fragmented and tentative, like raindrops falling on glass cups of different pitches, ding dong, every note carrying uncertainty. There is a stretch of silence in the middle, leaving only the sound of breathing and the faint touch of fingertips on the keys. That was the part she was most satisfied with, like someone making a decision in silence, then swallowing that decision back down. She listened to it twice, then started revising on the third run-through. She changed the progression of the chords in the second measure. Originally it resolved to a major key, but now she altered it to a minor key descent, and the mood immediately sank, sinking into some place where it did not wish to be seen. Good. She saved the file and synced it to the cloud. It was her habit, sync after every revision, with all versions from V1 to V7 stored in the cloud, each bearing a timestamp. She didn't know when these things would come in handy, but she knew that one day they would be needed. The phone lit up. Mia's message. "Sar, did you see it? Vivian posted about the performance again. A 9-photo grid, and she even included a video. The lighting looks amazing." Sarah stared at that name for 3 seconds but didn't click on it. She knew what Vivian had posted. More of those carefully edited stage photos, with light hitting her face, a 45-degree profile, curved eyelashes, lips painted in this year's trending dusty rose shade. And the caption was probably something like "Grateful for the stage" or "Music is my life." She flipped her phone over and placed it face down on the table. "It's not that I'm not angry. It's that being angry is useless." At the end of semester showcase last term, the piece she submitted was assigned by the department to Vivian for performance. The reason given was that Sarah's style is better suited to Vivian's vocal range. She went to talk to her advisor, who sat behind the desk holding a cup of tea, and said slowly, "Performance opportunities require a comprehensive assessment of stage presence. You're usually too quiet. You wouldn't be able to hold the stage." "Wouldn't be able to hold the stage," she repeated, her voice a bit dry. "It's just that." The advisor coughed. "The stage needs someone who can captivate the audience. You're too reserved. Standing up there, you're like a plant, motionless." She stood at the office door, clutching the return sheet music, the corners of the paper crumpled. Like a plant. These 5 words stabbed into her heart, rusted inside, and couldn't be pulled out. It wasn't that she couldn't stand on stage. She just didn't want to stand on stage smiling for people who didn't want to watch. Later she heard that after Vivian got the piece, she told her classmates during rehearsal, "I changed a few things in this piece. The original was too dull, so I added some touches to make it brighter. Give it a listen. Isn't it much better than before?" Sarah was sitting in the piano room when she heard laughter coming from next door. Her fingers froze on the keys, not playing a single note. She knew what Vivian had changed. She had replaced the descending minor phrase with an ascending major one, filled the empty spaces with strings, and removed the sound of breathing, wiping out every detail she had spent 3 months perfecting, swapping them for a pile of flashy but hollow embellishments. A piece about silence had been turned into a piece about bustle. It was like filling every space in a poem with words and then saying, "Look, I made it more complete." That night she stayed in the piano room alone until 11, playing that piece from beginning to end. After finishing, she didn't cry. She just put the sheet music into her bag. As she walked out of the teaching building, she found it was raining outside. She hadn't brought an umbrella, so she just walked back to the dorm like that. Rainwater trickled down her hair and into her eyes, stinging a little, but she didn't wipe it away. Mia was startled to see her come back with wet hair. "Why didn't you use an umbrella?" "Forgot." She wasn't lying. Her mind was filled with that altered melody, stuck in her throat, impossible to swallow down or spit out. After that, she never submitted work on her own initiative again. It wasn't giving up. It was saving everything to the cloud, revising version after version, and even when satisfied, not submitting it, just leaving it there. Mia said she was acting out of spite. Sarah shook her head. "It's not spite. It's waiting." "Waiting for what?" She didn't answer. But a voice inside her said, "Wait for a moment when they have no choice but to listen to me." Actually, the relationship between Sarah and Vivian wasn't like this in the beginning. When they first started college, they lived on the same floor and occasionally ran into each other in the communal bathroom. Vivian would take the initiative to say hello. "You're in the composition department too? What a coincidence." Back then, Vivian's smile seemed genuine, her eyes curving into crescents, tilting her head as she spoke, like an endearing cat. Once, while queuing for a practice room, Sarah was waiting when Vivian came out of the room next door. "Are you waiting for a practice room? You can take this one. I just finished practicing." She pushed the door open and made a welcoming gesture. "Go on in, the air conditioning is still on." Sarah was quite touched at the time. She walked into that piano room, sat down and started playing. Halfway through, she thought to herself that Vivian was truly a good person. Later she found out that Vivian giving up the piano room that day was because she simply didn't need to practice. She had better resources, a studio off campus, professional recording equipment, and other things. In the second semester of her freshman year, Sarah wrote a string quartet that was selected as the representative work for new students. She was happy all evening, and the next day she rushed to check the performance list, only to find that her name wasn't on it. She froze in front of the bulletin board and looked 3 times. Her work was retained, but the role in the performance was given to Vivian. She went to ask her mentor, who pushed up their glasses and said, "She fits the Academy's image better." "The Academy's image?" The mentor coughed. "Image and temperament. You know what I mean." Sarah didn't speak. She stood in the hallway, watching Vivian walk out of the office with that standard, perfect smile on her face. Vivian saw her, her eyes flickering, and walked over, lowering her voice. "Sarah, don't take it to heart. It's the department's arrangement. There's nothing I can do. Don't worry. I'll play your piece beautifully." In that moment, Sarah suddenly understood. Vivian's kindness was a performance for everyone to see. And she, Sarah, was part of the act. It was from then on that Sarah started paying attention to Vivian. There was no particular agenda, just an instinctive desire to know what exactly lay beneath this person's perfection. One time during the first semester of her sophomore year, she went to hand in an assignment and happened to catch a glimpse of Vivian's phone screen outside the counselor's office. On the lit chat interface, someone saved as Derek had just sent a message. "The sheet music is ready, take a look." Vivian quickly put away her phone, and when she looked up and saw Sarah, her expression seemed unnatural for a split second, but she soon returned to normal, smiled with a nod and walked away. Sarah didn't think much of it at the time, but that name, that message, for some reason stayed in her mind. Later on, intermittently, she saw them a few more times. Vivian would disappear for 2 or 3 hours every Wednesday afternoon. Once, when Sarah was waiting for her in the practice room after rehearsal, she ran into Derek walking out of the alley outside the school gate, holding a document folder, with Vivian following behind him. The two didn't speak, keeping a distance of 2 meters, walking one after the other. Sarah stood behind the window of the piano room, watching that retreating figure, and slowly began to form some suspicions in her mind. She didn't make a scene. She simply recorded everything she saw and heard in a document. It wasn't a prelude to revenge, but more of an instinct, like finding a nail in the dark. You don't know if it will prick someone in the future, but you know it's there. In her sophomore year, the college organized an intercollegiate exchange performance, and Sarah's work was selected again. She thought it was finally her turn, but a week before the show, her advisor notified her. Sarah, Vivian will go again this time. She has more stage experience. You'll have to wait a bit longer. Wait a bit longer. She had been hearing that sentence for 4 years. During her junior year, she stopped signing up for any performances. Mia stamped her foot in anger. Why are you so cowardly? Are you just going to let her bully you? Sarah didn't answer. She wasn't cowardly. She was just still waiting. Vivian's performance photos dominated the feed for 2 days. The comments were uniformly full of praise. Vivian is amazing. Queen of the stage. Her aura is incredible. Sarah's finger paused for a moment when she scrolled past them. Then she swiped away. She didn't want to look. But some things don't cease to exist just because you don't look at them. For instance, the conversation drifting from outside the music room right now. Did you hear Vivian's new piece? It's amazing. Even better than the one from last semester. How does she do it? Coming out with a new work every single semester. She's just got talent, I guess. Look at Sarah, hasn't turned in anything all semester. She's probably lost her touch. Yeah, I used to hear she was pretty impressive, but now it seems she's just SOSO. Hey, do you guys think Vivian is the most talented in our department? Is that even a question? Look how steady she is in every performance. Someone like Sarah, just a flash in the pan. Laughter. That kind of laughter, full of superiority and nonchalance, burrowing into the ears like mosquitoes. Sarah's fingers paused on the keys, a chord only half pressed. She took a deep breath, turned up the volume on her headphones, and continued working on her own piece. She hadn't lost her touch. She just didn't want to hand her children over to others anymore, only to have them remade beyond recognition. In the afternoon, the composition department held a meeting regarding the graduation showcase. The department head stood on the podium. The graduation showcase is the most important event for our department. This year it will be streamed live during the school anniversary, with industry guests attending as judges. The top 3 will receive direct recommendation for contract signing, and the first place, he paused, will get the opportunity to collaborate with teacher Marcus. The classroom instantly erupted. Marcus, a top-tier domestic music producer who has launched 3 divas and won 2 Golden Melody Awards for Best Production. Collaborating with him was equivalent to stepping straight into the industry's most elite circle. Sarah's heartbeat skipped a beat. The deadline is next Wednesday, the department head continued. Submit an original composition and perform it live. Solo or ensemble is fine, but it must be your own original work. Your own original work. She heard those 4 words clearly. Her own creation from the very first note to the very last rest, written entirely by herself. After the meeting, Vivian was surrounded by a crowd. You're definitely signing up, right, Vivian? Naturally. Vivian smiled and tucked her hair back, a gesture she had practiced many times, perfectly revealing the silver bracelet on her wrist. I'm definitely going to take first place in the graduation showcase. After all, she smiled even more sweetly. I am the face of our department, aren't I? Her gaze swept across the classroom, paused on Sarah for a second, the corners of her mouth lifting slightly, then moved away. Sarah understood that expression. You think you're worthy? Sarah clenched her fist, her fingernails digging into her palm. Returning to the dormitory that evening, she opened her computer and looked at the dozen project files stored in the cloud. From freshman to senior year, every song she had written was there, every version and every revision. Those files were like a row of silent soldiers, standing neatly in formation, waiting for her inspection. She clicked on the most recent one, temporarily named The Last Whisper. She had worked on this one for 3 months and revised it 11 times. The introduction was a minimalist piano monologue, like a person speaking to the air in an empty room with a very soft voice. Then one by one the other instruments joined in like an echo, like a response, like silence finally being heard. The climax wasn't explosive. It was a slow, irreversible surge, like the tide, not a wave. A wave crashes, a tide engulfs. She listened, then closed her eyes. This was the one. Mia poked her head down from the top bunk. Decided. Yeah. Then what about Vivian? I don't care what she does. Sarah opened her eyes, her voice soft but steady. This time I'll stand up there myself. Mia looked at her profile, hesitated to speak, and finally said only, "Then I'll be cheering for you." Sarah smiled, a very faint smile, like the breath breathed onto a window in winter, vanishing in an instant. But she knew that breath was warm. On the day Sarah handed in the application form, she ran into Vivian in the hallway. Vivian was wearing a well-tailored beige trench coat, her hair freshly styled, with curls falling perfectly on her shoulders. She saw the application form in Sarah's hand, and a flicker crossed her eyes. "You signed up too?" Her tone was surprised, but there was a hint of tension in that surprise. "Yeah." "Good luck then." Vivian smiled and walked away. The smile was perfect, a standard curve. Even the crinkling at the corners of her eyes was just right. But Sarah couldn't help feeling that something was hidden beneath that smile. The next day during rehearsal class, Sarah was called aside by her mentor. "Sarah, did you sign up for a solo performance for your graduation showcase?" "Yes." The mentor looked troubled. "You see, there are limited slots for solo performances. Vivian has already signed up for a piano solo, and you both play the piano. The department feels it's too repetitive. Could you change the format? Perhaps an ensemble." Sarah paused for a moment. "I signed up first." "Well, Vivian has performed more prominently in many previous showcases, and the department took a comprehensive view." "A comprehensive view of what?" Sarah's voice suddenly turned cold, startling even herself. She rarely spoke like that. Her voice was usually gentle and low, as if afraid of disturbing anyone. But in this moment that voice emerged from her throat, carrying a sharpness she hadn't even realized. The advisor was also taken aback. He coughed. "Sarah, please try to understand. The graduation showcase is broadcast live to the entire school, and even the whole internet, so stage effects are very important. My piece isn't suitable for an ensemble." Sarah interrupted him. "It was written for a solo. Adding other instruments would cause the structure to fall apart." The mentor sighed. "I'll discuss it with the department again." Sarah's hands were trembling as she walked out of the office. Not from fear. From anger. The anger of being pushed to the margins again and again. The anger of always being the one to yield despite having done nothing wrong. The anger of always being subject to comprehensive consideration, when her own work was clearly better. She recalled the string quartet that was replaced during her freshman year, the exchange performance that was substituted during her sophomore year, and the piece that was altered beyond recognition last semester. Every time it was a comprehensive consideration. Every time she was the one asked to step aside. Mia was waiting for her in the dorm. Seeing her return with red eyes, Mia didn't ask a single question and simply shoved a cup of hot cocoa into her hands. "Drink something sweet." Sarah held the cup, the steam making her eyes sting even more. But she didn't cry. "Mia," she said, her voice a bit hoarse. "Tell me, am I just too tolerant?" Mia was silent for a moment. "It's not that you're tolerant. It's that you think there's no point in arguing with them. But sometimes, you have to make a fuss so people know you're not a pushover." Sarah looked down at the brown liquid in her cup, reflecting her face. "This time I won't take it anymore." Later, the mentor still gave her the solo slot. Sarah knew it wasn't because the department had a sudden change of heart. It was because her behavior that day had been too abnormal, and the mentor was probably afraid she would cause a scene. Just as well. Whatever the reason, she got the slot. She began rehearsing. She soaked in the practice room every day, from morning till night. She played The Last Whisper countless times, until her fingers developed calluses, until she could find the position of every key with her eyes closed. She wasn't preparing for a performance. She was preparing for a war. 3 days before the school anniversary livestream, after Sarah finished her final full rehearsal, she checked the project file to ensure all tracks and effect parameters were adjusted correctly before shutting down her computer and heading back to the dorm. She made sure the practice room door was locked when she left. She checked it twice. But when she returned the next day, the lock was unchanged, yet the file was different. The moment she opened the project file, her heart felt as if it were being gripped by someone. All the tracks were in disarray. The piano main melody had been deleted, the string section's effect parameters had been tweaked to distortion, the volume balance on the mix tracks had been reset to 0, and even the marked section names had been changed to garbled text. It wasn't a crash. It was deliberate sabotage. Precise, targeted sabotage. Every single track was still there, but when combined it was just a pile of noise. Sarah stared at the screen, frozen in the practice room. Footsteps and laughter came from outside. She mechanically shut down the computer, packed her things and walked out of the practice room. She ran into Vivian in the hallway. Vivian was chatting and laughing with a few classmates. When she saw Sarah, her smile didn't fade. She even took the initiative to greet her. "Sarah, how are the preparations coming along? The live stream is the day after tomorrow. You know?" The final syllable of that, "you know," rose with a subtle hint of smugness that only Sarah could detect. Sarah looked at her. Vivian's makeup was exquisite, her lips a dusty rose color, and her earrings glinting with fragmented light. She seemed to be in a very good mood, perhaps a little too good. The smile was perfect, but Sarah couldn't help feeling that something else was hiding beneath it. "Not bad," Sarah said. She walked past Vivian without looking back. Back in the dorm, she opened her laptop. Not the one in the piano room, but her own. She logged into the cloud. The files were still there. From V1 to V11, every version lay quietly in the cloud with timestamps, revision history, and drafts, all present and accounted for. She stared at the neat row of file lists on the screen, the corners of her mouth slowly curving upward. Sarah had actually kept an ace up her sleeve all along. In her sophomore year, after inadvertently catching a glimpse of a message from Derek on Vivian's phone, she had become extra vigilant. Later, after seeing Vivian and Derek exchanging files off campus several times, she saved screenshots of the times, dates, and transfer records she had noted. It wasn't a calculated effort to take anyone down. She just instinctively felt that when it came to certain things, having evidence in hand was better than not. She looked at the cloud folder, feeling a sense of calm. This blade had been sharpened for 4 years, and finally the time had come to draw it. Mia rolled over on the top bunk. "What's wrong?" "My files were destroyed." Sarah's voice was so calm it didn't sound like she was talking about her own affairs. "What?" Mia nearly fell out of bed. "Who did it? Was it?" "Don't worry." Sarah turned her head, her eyes gleaming brightly in the dim light, a bit frighteningly. "I have a backup." "Then why aren't you angry?" Sarah thought for a moment. "I am angry, but I'd rather see her expression." "What expression?" "The day after tomorrow." Sarah closed her computer and lay down, her voice so soft it was like she was talking to herself. "When she realizes I don't need that file at all." Mia looked at her profile and suddenly felt she didn't quite recognize her. The Sarah who was usually so quiet, who would only play the piano alone in the practice room when someone else snatched an opportunity, now seemed like a blade already drawn from its sheath. The school anniversary livestream. The auditorium of Shinglong Academy of Arts was decorated like a small concert hall, with professional-grade lighting, sound, and camera setups. The livestream link was shared across the internet, and the online viewer count kept climbing. Sarah sat in the waiting area, third to perform. She wore a simple black dress, her hair tied in a low ponytail with no makeup. Compared to the classmates beside her who were all dressed up, she looked like she was in the wrong place. "Sarah, are you sure you don't want to put on some makeup?" The girl next to her kindly reminded her. "It's a live stream. A lot of people will be watching. No need." Vivian was the first to perform. She wore a silver-white performance dress, and under the lights it looked like flowing moonlight. The moment she sat down at the piano, the entire room's attention was drawn to her. She truly had stage presence. Her back was perfectly straight, her head slightly raised like a proud swan. She was playing a majestic piano concerto. There were no major flaws in her technique. The pitch and rhythm were solid, and her fingers skipped across the keys like a nimble butterfly. But Sarah listened with her eyes closed. Every note was in the right place, yet there was no breath between them, no hesitation. Like an exquisite empty shell. After she finished, the applause was enthusiastic. Vivian stood up and bowed, beaming with a bright smile. The bullet comments were flooded with "amazing," "God tier," and "I'm crying." Sarah opened her eyes and said nothing. The second performer was a boy. His jazz piano was standard and unremarkable, with nothing memorable about it. Then it was her turn. "Next up, composition department, Sarah." As she stood up, a few students in the waiting area exchanged glances. That's the one who's usually so invisible. I heard she signed up for a solo performance. Wonder if she can pull it off. She walked onto the stage. The moment the lights hit her, she narrowed her eyes slightly. Her palms were sweating, a little cool. But she took a deep breath, walked over to the piano, sat down and opened the lid. Her fingers rested on the keys. In that moment she suddenly felt calm. For 4 years this was the moment she had been waiting for. Not to prove anything to anyone, but to prove it to herself. Her music deserved to be taken seriously. She didn't start playing immediately. Turning to the sound console at the side of the stage, she said to the staff, "Please turn off the accompaniment." The staff froze. "What? Turn off the accompaniment?" Sarah's voice echoed through the entire auditorium via the microphone. "I don't need it." The venue fell silent for a second. Then whispers broke out. "Damaku. What is she going to do? A cappella? That's way too arrogant." Sarah paid no attention. She turned back to the piano, closed her eyes. Then she began to play. When the first note landed, the entire auditorium fell silent. It was an extremely low note, so low it seemed about to sink into the floor. Like a person in a room late at night finally speaking the first words. The sound was soft, but everyone listening held their breath. The second note did not follow immediately. It waited a moment, as if confirming that the first person was truly speaking. The piano's melodic line was like a thin thread, yet every stitch pricked the heart. Without the support of accompaniment, each note was laid bare in the air. In the middle she stopped. It was not the stop at the end of a piece, but the pause of a breath. Like someone choking up mid-sentence, then taking a deep breath and continuing. In that moment the bullet comments froze. No one typed. Then she continued to play. The melody slowly climbed up from the lower register, bit by bit, like the tide. First you felt the water submerge your ankles, then your knees, then your waist, and by the time you realized it you were completely submerged. The final note. She did not press the sustain pedal. The moment her fingers left the keys, the sound cut off. Clean and decisive, like a sentence stopping abruptly at the most crucial point. The resonance vibrated in the air for 3 seconds. Then applause. Not polite clapping, but applause that sprang from the seats, accompanied by shouts. Some people stood up, some slapped the armrests of their chairs, and some covered their eyes with reddened rims. The bullet comments exploded. "Holy crap, I'm crying. What kind of god is this? The a cappella was incredible. Goosebumps from head to toe." Sarah stood up and bowed. Her hands were trembling slightly, but her face was calm. She saw Marcus take off his glasses at the judges' table and wipe the corners of his eyes. As Sarah walked off the stage, it felt like she was walking on cotton. It wasn't nervousness. It was a massive release. The breath she had been holding for 4 years was finally let out. Mia rushed over and hugged her in the waiting area. "Sarah, you're crazy. You're actually crazy. A cappella. How did you pull that off?" "It's my piece. I've played it hundreds of times." "But your file." "The cloud," Sarah said succinctly. "I never perform using local files." Mia widened her eyes, then laughed, her eyes rimmed with red. "You were prepared for this all along?" Sarah didn't answer, but her eyes said it all. A stir came from the judges' panel. Marcus stood up. He walked to the microphone at the front of the stage, and the entire venue fell silent. "I rarely express personal opinions during the judging phase," Marcus said in a low, steady voice, "but today I'd like to make an exception." He looked toward the waiting area. "That performance by the student just now reminds me of a saying, true music is not a pile of techniques, but a soul speaking." He paused. "I've been a producer for 20 years and have heard too many correct performances. Technically perfect, emotionally on point, flawless, but something was always missing. That missing thing that student just now had." He turned to the audience. "Some of you play more accurately than her, some play faster than her, but no one plays more truly than her." In the waiting area, Vivian's expression changed. She sat in the corner, clutching the hem of her skirt, her knuckles turning white. Marcus continued. "I noticed a detail. That student performed unaccompanied. Choosing to go unaccompanied on the graduation showcase stage requires either extreme confidence or sheer desperation. Whichever it was, the result speaks for itself." Sarah stood in the shadows of the waiting area, her heart beating fast, but her face calm. She knew that the real battle had not yet begun. Marcus's words were like a bomb. But Vivian was not going to sit idly by. After the second half of the performance ended, the judges entered the discussion phase. Just at that moment, Vivian stood up. "I have a question." All eyes in the room turned to her. Vivian walked to the center of the aisle, her voice not loud, but coming through clearly via the microphone. "Regarding the piece Sarah just performed, I would like to ask, is it an original composition?" The air instantly froze. Sarah looked up, staring at Vivian. Vivian's expression was very calm, even carrying a hint of concern. The kind of "I'm only doing this for the sake of fairness" concern that Sarah had seen far too many times. "Because," Vivian continued, "the main melody of that piece has a lot of similarities with the one I performed last semester, the one written by Sarah. I just wanted to confirm if it's possible that it's an adaptation, or..." She didn't say the word plagiarism, but everyone understood. The bullet comments instantly split. "Wait, it really is kind of similar. What does Vivian mean? Is she hinting that Sarah plagiarized herself? But that piece was written by Sarah in the first place. This twist is interesting." Sarah watched Vivian's performance and suddenly felt a bit amused. It was that kind of weary amusement, the feeling of just as I expected. She stood up. "Vivian," her voice was steady, "you say my piece is similar to the one you performed last semester?" "Yes, the melodic progression and structure." "That piece," Sarah interrupted, "was written by me." The entire room was in an uproar. "So the similarity is only natural because they are the same piece to begin with. It's just that the version you performed has been altered." Vivian's smile froze for an instant. "You changed the descending minor key to an ascending major key, filled the empty spaces with strings, and removed the breathing sounds. A piece about silence was turned by you into a piece about bustle. And then you told everyone that it was your arrangement." But that's not the point." Sarah's voice suddenly turned cold. "The point is, you said I plagiarized." She took out her phone from her pocket. "Since you brought up originality, let's talk about originality." Sarah raised her phone, and the screen was projected onto the auditorium's large screen. Cloud folder. Final Whisper _V1. Created August 17, 2025, 23:14 and 7 seconds. Final Whisper _V2. Created August 22, 2025, 2:33 and 51 seconds. The Last Whisper _V3. Created September 3, 2025, 21 hours 47 minutes and 19 seconds. Goes all the way to V11. Each version has a complete timestamp, modification records, and draft files. V1 was just a rough piano melody line, like a baby's first cry. V2 added string concepts. V3 began adjusting the structure. Every step of the evolution is crystal clear, like the complete growth rings of a tree from a seed to the sky. "This is my creative timeline," Sarah's voice echoed through the auditorium. "From last August to this March, 11 versions, every modification recorded." She swiped the screen. "Now Vivian, can you present the timeline of your work's creation?" The room fell silent. Vivian stood in the middle of the aisle, the color draining from her face bit by bit. "And this?" Sarah swiped again. A screenshot appeared on the screen, a WeChat chat history. The sender's profile picture was blurred out, but the content was clearly visible. "The song is written, take a look and see if it works." "Okay, money transferred to you. Next time let me know a week in advance. I've had a lot of orders lately." Chat times: September, October, November, December 2025. Available every month. Vivian's face turned completely pale. "This is the chat history between you and Derek," Sarah said, her voice as calm as if she were reading a report. "Derek, an independent musician and a ghostwriter in the underground arrangement scene. You pay him $5,000 to $8,000 a semester to write music for you, and then you perform it under your own name." "How could you?" Vivian's voice trembled. But the words "how did you get it" remained unfinished, because she suddenly realized that saying them was tantamount to admitting it. It was too late. Sarah didn't give her a chance to catch her breath. "The piece you performed last semester was originally written by me." After getting it, you had Derek revise it and then you put your own name on it. The graduation showcase piece for this semester, Sarah paused, was also written by Derek, right? Vivian's lips were trembling. She couldn't get a single word out. The audience was already in an uproar. The bullet comments were scrolling too fast to read, with keywords constantly popping up: ghostwriter, hired writer, Vivian is done, plot twist, social death. Marcus watched all this from the judge's table, his expression complicated. He didn't speak, but his gaze shifted from Vivian to Sarah, with a look that suggested he was reassessing her. Sarah took one last look at Vivian. Vivian stood in the middle of the aisle, the light stretching her shadow long. Her makeup was starting to run. Her eyeliner had smudged a little, and that exquisite bean-red color on her lips had become blotchy. She no longer looked like that dazzling queen of the stage, but like someone stripped of all packaging, naked, disheveled, and with nowhere to hide. Sarah had thought she would feel vindicated. But in that moment, what surged up wasn't a sense of gratification, but an indescribable exhaustion. She remembered their freshman year, when Vivian had just arrived at the school. Once, after hearing Sarah play the piano in the practice room, Vivian pushed open the door and walked in, saying, "You play so well, could you teach me?" Back then, Vivian's eyes were bright, the kind of brightness that comes from a genuine desire to learn. And then she discovered that no matter how hard she tried, she could never learn that soulfulness. Realizing there was an insurmountable wall between effort and talent, realizing she could spend 10,000 hours practicing the piano, but what she played was still missing something. Then she chose a different path. Sarah put her phone back in her pocket and walked back to her seat. She didn't look at Vivian again. What happened next was handled by others. The department head urgently halted the live stream. The jury announced a pause on the graduation showcase results, and the school launched an investigation. Vivian was escorted out of the auditorium. Rumor has it that she cried in the hallway until her makeup was completely ruined. 3 days later, the investigation results were released. Technical analysis of Vivian's graduation showcase track revealed that the metadata of the project files perfectly matched the characteristics of Derek's workstation. WeChat chat logs, transfer records, Derek's confession. The chain of evidence was as watertight as a meticulously composed piece of music, with not a single note out of place. Vivian was expelled. Derek was placed on the industry blacklist. That ghostwriting supply chain was subjected to an official investigation by the relevant authorities, following media exposure of this incident. Sarah saw the news in her dorm room. Mia handed her the phone. "Take a look." She glanced at it and returned the phone. "Are you not happy?" Mia asked. "You won." Sarah leaned back against the chair, looking out the window. It was getting dark, and the streetlights on campus were lighting up one by one. "It's not about whether I'm happy or not," she said. "I just feel. It didn't have to be like this." Mia didn't speak. If she had studied properly, even if she lacked talent, she could at least have been an honest musician. This circle isn't a place where only geniuses can survive. Sarah's voice was soft, but she chose the stupidest path. After a moment of silence, Sarah suddenly smiled. "However, if anyone touches my files again next time, I will still make her socially die." Mia froze for a second, then laughed out loud. Outside the window, the light from the street lamp filtered through the curtains, casting a warm yellow shadow on Sarah's face. She looked no different from usual, quiet, appearing uncompetitive and unassuming. But Mia knew that this person had a steel bar running through her bones. It couldn't be bent, nor could it be broken. A month later, Sarah received an email from Marcus. The message was brief. "Interested in coming to my studio to talk about that piece of yours?" Sarah read it 3 times. Then she opened the cloud, looking at the file named Final Whisper _V11, her finger hovering over the rename option. She thought for a moment, then changed the file name to First One. "It is not the final whisper. It is the first sound." The wind outside slips in through the half-open crack, brushing past the screen. That wisp of wind is very light. Light as a sentence just beginning.